don't be the person that sits there and goes, I've got this brilliant idea, and then it never ever gets off the ground. If you're a bit nervous about it or you're not sure the market's there, do some market research. Set up a web page with a waiting list, try and put it on Facebook, social media, whatever you want to do. See if people are interested. They can sign up for that. And what that actually does is create a little bit of scarcity towards your product so that when you do launch it, you've already got a preloaded amount of people on the waiting list. Testing, testing. Right, everybody, this is just a little kind of bonus video, I suppose, just to round out season 1 of the podcast. We're going to have a quick recap on literally kind of maybe your sort of 3 or 4 main kind of points that we covered, some really big bits that stuck out to me and some fun moments, and also just kind of a general recap and a bit of guidance as to exactly what we've covered in season 1. So I hope you enjoy this. So we're going to start off at looking at our very first one with Catherine from Mango Insurance. So that was a few episodes ago. If you want to have a look back, you can watch any one of these or any of the ones that I don't mention. So please feel free to go back through the archives. Some real golden nuggets and some snippets in there for you to take away for your businesses. But we're going to quickly just recap on Catherine. So the important message with Catherine's was actually trying to find her USP, her unique selling point in a really crowded market. So she was in the insurance industry, but you can apply this to anywhere where there's a fairly popular amount of businesses in it, so it's quite a crowded place. So the good thing with Catherine's business is it kind of have a bit of a force field around it because it actually is a regulated industry. That means that it's not so easy. So it's got a lower barrier to entry, which means that someone can't come along and start up next door to you or whatever. But it is a fairly crowded market. The brokerage market, I mean, you just go on Google, you can just whack in like insurance broker or something like that near me, and I guarantee about 20 of them will come up. And there'll be all the way from one-man bands to people that have got maybe like half a dozen or a dozen or so staff. So how do you stick out in that market? When we spoke to Catherine, we actually looked at some of the ways that she was trying to stand out in the market, which was being small, being local, because the industry's gone through kind of like a bit of a change, if you like, where a lot of the bigger firms have bought out some of the smaller ones and they're growing into these like mega insurance companies. So she was trying to pick up in that market where you kind of still need that local kind of touch or whatever. The thing that we actually looked at was whether or not she'd actually really done any kind of brand research to that as to whether that was really what people wanted to see. There was talks about opening branches and shops and things like that, and then localizing themselves. And then geographically, you become like all about your local area. So we spent quite a long time talking about really the kind of like, why would you do that, if you like? So I'm being inquisitive. I'm not sure localizing herself around there was always going to be that greater idea. It's good in certain scenarios, but it really depends on what the long-term strategy and goal was for Catherine. So that was a really interesting podcast because we kind of touched on, I think, a topic that's quite prevalent for a lot of businesses where they're in a crowded market. It could be coffee shops, or you could be, I don't know, gyms or something like that. Like there's always, every town's got like 4 or 5 gyms in them nowadays. So I think making sure that you stick out and you're not just trying to do something that people have moved away from as your USP. So like if everybody's going online and you go, well, we're going to be the one that isn't online and we're going to be bricks and mortar, make sure you do your maths on it, because there might be a reason why they're going online, and that is because it is no longer feasible to have a bricks and mortars type store. Or maybe it's just because people are obsessed and driven for value for money in terms of getting their prices down, so they've got rid of their bricks and mortar stores. So if you structure the business right, you can have that and capture that audience. But you always have to remember, does that audience exist? If you think about the insurance industry, with Catherine's in, really, it's quite complicated because she's going to be thinking to herself, oh, I'll open this bricks and mortar store, but actually your kind of baby boomer, maybe people over 50s, those kind of things, they like to come in, have a chat and a coffee and the rest of it. And that's quite time consuming from a business point of view. And as the younger generation, maybe your kind of millennials backwards, I never remember whether it's Gen Z, X or whatever, and where the things are. Apparently I'm a geriatric millennial, so I was at the end of it. So I don't know, there's even subcategories there. But either way, basically you need to figure out, is in time that market going to disappear? So you're catering for those baby boomers or those over 50s that are kind of happy coming in and seeing people. But as we move forward, is that younger generation actually going to care about that? Are they all just using it online? I mean, we run a lettings agent, block management company, the rest of it. Apart from contractors collecting keys, we get very little passerbys coming in. So the market there has moved on. So real key takeaways from that is to make sure that you look at what your market's doing, why your competitors are doing what they're doing, make sure your USP is actually a USP, and just make sure your vision is as wide as it possibly can. If you want to grow that business massive, there's no point in going, we are local and we're micro and do that. If that's what you want to do, that's fine, but that doesn't lead to you getting to the point where you're working on your business, not in your business, because you're staying on that bottom tier of that entrepreneurial kind of triangle or hierarchical structure, if you like, which we refer to. Videos like that on our YouTube channel, by going to Matthew Cox Enterprise into YouTube, just type that in and you'll be able to see a plethora of videos on there, and you'll be able to see that video and a whole load of other ones. So if you want some quick actionable tips that you can take away today, my key tip here is to make sure that you actually do some market research. You talk to your clients, you have a look at your data analytics for your website, that kind of stuff, and actually make sure that your vision is actually where your company's going. So you might think, I'm going down pathway Z, and you're thinking that's where we want to go. But actually all your traffic and all your interesting things and your actual input from your clients and what they want, it might be going over here in Z or Y or whatever the other letter was that I referred to. So a fork in the road, essentially. So that's kind of Catherine's podcast done. Lots and lots of information about growing your business and looking at your USP. So let's move on and get stuck into the next one. So our second one that we want to have a quick look at, well, it's kind of a combination of two, I suppose. So mainly Julie from Julie's Art of Noise. We want to talk about imposter syndrome. But actually, if you rewind all the way back to the beginning of season one, or nearly the beginning, I think it was like maybe the fourth podcast, we had Luke Martin from Robert Martin Roofing Services. He had a bit of imposter syndrome. We didn't touch on it too much, but it's all about basically being convinced of your value and what you're presenting to your clients, and making sure that you're confident with it and you're not worrying about what your self-worth is. So in the podcast with Julie, if we go back to that, we touched a lot on the fact that I thought she was undercharging, she wasn't focusing on the right things, and that really she hadn't done her market research, but she was suffering with a bit of imposter syndrome, which there's loads of books and bits and bobs, and we'll put some links in the description below. But imposter syndrome is basically when you don't really feel that you're qualified to talk about something, or maybe your self-worth is that. And the thing is with Julie is she probably hadn't really done her market research and seen what her competitors were charging, and also really done a breakdown of exactly how much it's costing her to get to all of these gigs, and done a kind of full business analysis. So we'll do some key tips on my kind of thoughts around imposter syndrome in a second. But the podcast from Julie is a really good one for those of you that are maybe one-man bands, one-lady bands in that kind of gigging type economy. Maybe you're doing business coaching all the way through to perhaps singing or being in a band or something like that, or doing corporate gigs. You could be like a magician or something, I don't know, whatever. But you need to be able to watch that podcast on our YouTube channel and basically digest the fact that, sometimes it's worth just actually analysing what your competitors are doing and what it's really costing you to get around to all of these events, and make sure that you're charging a true and fair value. My first key tip about it really is about building your own knowledge and making sure that you're confident. So there's that age-old phrase of not being the cleverest person in the room. So if you're sat at a meeting and there's 10 of you, 9 of you should be advising you, and you should be sat there, you should be digesting what those professionals say and those other people that you've employed or invited into this meeting. And you should be the one sat at the end of the table making that entrepreneurial decision. You need the accountant, the solicitor, and the rest of it. And it's okay to say, I'm not entirely sure. Can you explain that in English to me? Or, can I go away and do some research or something like that? I want to fulfill my knowledge. And that is what it's all about, is making yourself a really, really good jack of all trades, essentially. So read lots of books. I've put loads of books in there before about imposter syndrome, about managing staff, about development, all that kind of stuff, cash flow and everything. There's loads of them. Just check. I'm not going to list them all now, but just check out the link in the description where sort of kind of copy and paste some bits from other YouTube videos that we've done and stick them down in there. But yeah, really, you want to make sure that you are kind of always learning and always seeking to learn and confident about things. And that will help you kind of believe in yourself. Even if you don't know the answer, it's okay to not know the answer. You don't have to fluff through. The most confident people I know go, I'm not qualified to answer that. But what I will do is find someone that's qualified, or I will learn about it. So guys, quickly before we get into that next tip, we're going to look at one little pro tip on to how to deal with the last thing that we just discussed. I'm going to tell you that you need to spend about 30 minutes a day educating yourself every day. Now, the one key tip that I would say, brilliant thing to do, is obviously go and listen to all the rest of my podcasts and videos and audio files and all the rest of it when you're driving along. Obviously, that's a shameless plug, but that is a really good way of expanding your knowledge. Failing that, read some books or listen to some books. Time and time again, what do you do in the morning? You sit in the traffic. I know some people work from home, but you might spend the first hour or so just chilling in the kitchen or whatever. That downtime, whether you're stuck in traffic or you're on the school run or whatever you're doing, rather than listening to the latest Sugar Babe song from Heart FM that's been repeated 300 times, stick on an audio book. There's loads in the description for you to do. Listen to that, and every single day you'll increase your knowledge, and that will compound over time to give you a really well-rounded view of how business life and that kind of environment goes. Tip number 2 is a little bit about overthinking things. I know you have to analyze stuff, and you've got to really kind of sit down and make sure that the decisions you do are actionable and they've got KPIs to them and the rest of it. But sometimes you just need to make decisions. Now, one of the most famous kind of quotes, so I can't even actually remember who it's by, so it clearly wasn't that famous, but it's really about the property market. And then they say, when's the best time to get into property? Or the best time was tomorrow, or whatever the phrase is. And then they say, well, it was yesterday. So it was always previous. So it's like this time last year, I wish I'd have started, and you keep saying that. So why don't you just start today and make some actionable things? So the amount of times I see people do to-do lists and then they never complete them. They tell them that in 2025, they're going to do X, Y, Z or whatever, and then they never follow through on it. They say they're going to have one-to-ones with their staff and they never follow up on it. They say they're going to grow their business by X, Y, Z, but they never put some kind of actionable KPI plans in place in order to reach that. So key tip is really, when you're going to make these things, actually do it, and don't think to yourself, I'll do it tomorrow and so on, or I'll wait or whatever. The best time to start saving is today, not when the market's crashed. Best time to buy property is normally now, because if you're going to hold it for long term, it's going to go up anyway. So people always say, oh, I wish I'd have bought it 2 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever. When's the next time to buy? And the next time to buy is now. That's a common phrase. So that's more about the quote that I had, and my brain's kind of like remembering it a bit now. I'm sure we can insert who did that quote, but basically the whole premise of it is about making sure the stuff that you decide to do is actionable and you actually get on and do it. So number 1 tip is do your lists, make sure that you know what your plans are, and then make sure you actually commit and do them. I don't want to hear that you didn't complete your list when we get to 2026. So gang, another little pro tip or an extension to the last tip before we get into the next one. You want to know that it's okay to fail sometimes. So if you take Amazon, for example, they had loads and loads of products that they launched and failed. So the Amazon Fire phone, I don't know if anybody ever remembers that. A whole load of other plethora of things that they've launched and have not taken off at all. And they've wasted millions of pounds on it. But then you have AWS, which is their actual internet backup service. So they take data and store that in the Nevada desert somewhere in the cloud, even though we all know it's not really in the cloud, but it's what we terminology it. So you take that, and that has completely wiped out all of those previous losses and the rest of it. So I remember Jeff Bezos saying something in one of his speeches like, if you think the Fire Phone was a flop, you wait and see the graveyard of other stuff that we've mucked up on. So don't be scared. Sometimes you have to invest in money, and things will go wrong, and you need to do that and take that leap. Obviously, there's sometimes you might have to take a small leap into things. So Daniel Priestley does a really good couple of books on actually things called like waiting lists and testing the market out early. So I suggest you read some of his books. He's a big fan of doing kind of waiting lists and initial market research to make sure what he's going to launch actually has an audience. So make sure you do some of that, but don't be the person that sits there and goes, I've got this brilliant idea, and then it never ever gets off the ground. If you're a bit nervous about it or you're not sure the market's there, do some market research, set up a web page with a waiting list, try and put it on Facebook, social media, whatever you want to do, see if people are interested, they can sign up for that. And what that actually does is create a little bit of scarcity towards your product, so that when you do launch it, you've already got a preloaded amount of people on a waiting list. So just before we move on to the next tip, the pro tip, if you like, or extra nugget of information would be to keep some sort of journal or list of stuff. So Danny here, who does our editing, she just suggested to me that it would be a good idea to keep a journal. I'm not a big fan of journals because they are paper. So what you need to do is take your iPad or your computer or whatever, or maybe some sort of notes thing on your phone, and make some notes back to yourself. Actually, to be fair to Danny, even your iPhone now has a prompt every single day that says about putting in your journal. So use that. Again, it's not paper, so that makes me feel better. And we're saving the planet. It's not just a perversion to paper. It's good for the environment. But anyway, that aside, if you like paper, use paper, but make a journal and make sure you kind of list out those things that are failures, and maybe put some things down that you think might fail. So some things as you started to do stuff, you go, I can see this coming in the future. I need to keep an eye out for it. So maybe one side of the page you do your failures and what's gone wrong, and other ones maybe your threats. So think about SWOT analysis from back when you were at school in business studies, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. I know they taught you that, and when I said SWOT, you remembered it, but you couldn't remember what it stood for. Well, now you know. So do your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and make sure they're all in your journal. So our next podcast that we're going to look at is Steve Dam from Magpie Art, and we're going to be looking specifically more at kind of the mental health side of things. So on the podcast, I noticed over season 1, we had quite a lot of people talk about dyslexia, ADHD, mental health, that kind of stuff, and work-life balance and things like that. So I thought this was a really important one for us to actually have a look at and kind of dive a little bit deeper into. So with Steve, obviously with his journey, until he kind of found the space that he needed to succeed, he wasn't able to succeed because of his lifestyle. And the way that he's kind of, been brought up, and he had a military background and all that kind of stuff. And that those tools that he eventually found allowed him to go on to what he's achieving now. So what I wanted to talk about really is the fact that you need to kind of make sure that you've got that space. Like I always talk about like investing days and stuff like that, and putting that time aside. And in a way, that's kind of like your mental health stuff in a way, because you need to make sure that you've put your time aside for your family. You put like we talked about that with Logo Emporium, Matt Savage, making sure you don't feel guilty, looking after your mental health, and making sure that you are the best person that you can be. Ultimately, you're running your enterprise. So if you can't even look after yourself, how are you going to look after all your staff and all of your enterprise? So you need to make sure that you do that. Now, obviously, mental health is like a big topic, but even if we break it down to looking at the ADHD and the dyslexia, I mean, I'm dyslexic, and a lot of the people that have come on, and I think, it's a very common thing, and I mentioned that a few times during season 1, And Steve has ADHD and all that kind of stuff as well. But I think it allows those people to like hyper focus on stuff. I mean, Steve was saying that he would just literally just do art every single day, never even get out of the shower anymore if he was just left to his own devices. Obviously, I'm sure his wife comes and drags him out of that. But that is a bit like anybody else, you know, where they're allowed to like hyper focus on stuff. Like I'm fairly good at like getting my vision across and the rest of it, but I'm not particularly good at doing the stuff that doesn't lend itself to my dyslexia problems. So like writing emails, maybe portraying stuff away, you know, getting my kind of vision written down, if you like, in an administration type way. Very good at visualizing it and doing stuff. Like a lot of these videos, I tend to just kind of freestyle them and it kind of comes out. So you get them in a very raw format as I'm going along. So I think the key takeaway really is to make sure that you mold your life around your own needs and your own mental health, and make sure that you get that space to be the best person that you can be. I'm going to share some books and various links to mental health, other podcasts and books and things like that. So if you're listening to this on Audible, please do head over to our YouTube channel, it'll be in the description at the side there. And I think, you know, a key part of like trying to make sure that you're managing your own time is to pull on those key resources. Remember in the last tip, I talked about not being the smartest person in the room. Well, the sooner you accept that, the better you are. Like as soon as I accepted I was not particularly good at proofreading my own emails and got somebody else to do that for me, the productivity went through the roof, because I'm not spending my time stressing myself out dealing with whether I'm using the right where or where. I mean, where or were or said, you know, those sort of things on there and there. Like I really struggled with that. Second, that I mean, I'm a bit better at it now because I've trained myself. But actually, I think that the second that I realised that that was a weakness of mine, I just accepted it, accelerated me, because it allowed me to do what I do better rather than try and fix what I don't do very well. So remember to pull on your team members and those around you and get the right support networks in place so that you can flourish as an entrepreneur. So guys, the very last pro tip here, we're going to be looking at kind of really, I suppose, making time for your kind of mental health and your relaxation. Like it's okay to be like, I'm going to go on a couple of days holiday and not answer emails, turn it off or whatever. I know it's really stressful and it plays on your mind, but you need to put that time aside so that you can kind of recoup and then you can focus on stuff when you come back. You need to be fresh. Think of yourself like an iPhone. Imagine if you're always ever running on 15% battery and then every time it goes down to 5 you plug it back in, but you only ever top it up to 15. It's a pretty sketchy way of being, isn't it? So what you need to do is plug it in, make sure it gets up to at least 90-95% on a regular basis, whether that's taking a bit of time out of the business, maybe you go out for lunch with somebody, do some networking events, something different. Focusing not on the business all the time or being in it. You can still have it in the back of your mind, but not being in it, involved with the day-to-day running, is really going to do your mental health well. So remember that iPhone charging analogy. Make sure that you get up to that 95% every now and then. So that's kind of my round out of the 3 sort of podcasts that stuck out the most, that had like a common theme that I think is really useful to all entrepreneurs and business owners, senior staff, all that kind of stuff. So I hope you really enjoyed that kind of real round out and cap for kind of season 1 and the rest of it. And really, if you want to go back and have a look through the previous podcast, they're all in a playlist on Audible or on Apple podcasts, you know, online, basically in audio format across various platforms, or you can head over to our YouTube channel and actually watch the live videos as well. It depends on entirely what you want to do. Obviously, with the live videos, there's an awful lot of links in the description, so I'd encourage you to at least go on those and have a look at some of the books and things. But that aside, I think that, you know, that's a really good round out for you guys. Now, we're going to be moving on to season 2 in 2025. So that will be early 2025, where we've got new podcast guests on, a couple of returning ones, but we've got some new podcast guests coming on with some different issues. And as we go into a different type of climate, post-budget in the UK as well. So there'll be lots of questions about that and exciting things to come. We've also got some other footage for you as well, where we're going to be having some guests on in the meantime whilst we wait for season 2. So we're not just going to disappear for a few months. There's going to be some other exciting content coming. And we're also going to be making some changes to the podcast studio behind me. We're going to be getting some different things in the background, some new microphones and stuff like that. So, and some lighting effects and things. So hopefully season 2 will look visually really, really cool for you guys, but also will be a refreshed content lineup and the rest of it. And as I say, there'll be plenty of content in between, from podcasts where we've got actually 4 including me. So 4 people, 4 guests, if you like, although I'm not really a guest, coming on to talk about the budget. And that will be really interesting, hopefully, for you guys, and kind of a nice 4-way conversation shortly after it's all announced. And we'll also be just whacking out the normal YouTube videos with full of tips and bits and bobs and all those kind of key nuggets for you and everything. So go and get stuck into those. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, smash all of the stuff, comment below, whatever. And look really forward to seeing you in season 2.